Welcome to the latest episode. Adjust my
Of
mic.
Monday in MMORPG.
Dun, dun,
No,
dun, dun, dun.
I should not sing. I'm horrible. I'm sorry. I
It's all right.
apologize.
My throat's a little scratchy today, so I'm probably not the best singing voice anyway. Welcome everyone. Uh, we're going to continue the conversation from last week's episode. I also want to let everyone know this will be the last episode for the month of December. I'm out of the office. We pre-recorded these. There will not be any episodes until I want to say the ninth. Hang on, I'm looking at the wrong calendar. Till the 6th of January. That's assuming that you and I. That's assuming you and I record an episode on the 2nd of January, which is traditionally we do them on Thursdays. So we'll try to do one on that Thursday. So this will be the last episode of 2019, and everybody's going to go away for the holidays, and then we'll come back in the new year. So the conversation we had last week, we were talking about loot systems in general, and that kind of spun us off into thinking about sort of this the difference between the old school games like say EverQuest, where you would start the game and you would have this crappy chainmail, rusty iron, kind of like Dungeons and Dragons. Like when you first start off a classical D&D campaign, you're not in plate mail. You're not getting +1 long swords and bracers of might and ogre, belt of ogre strength and all these other things. You're starting off with rusty chain, ragged leather, and you have to work your way up. And especially in D&D, which is a good inspiration for us, and also the way they did it in early EverQuest was, you started off with these rusty items, and you could go quite a long time before you got your first magical piece. It could be months if you didn't know the game and you were playing it for the first time. I think the first item I ever got in EverQuest, I can't even remember the name of it. It was a long sword for rangers that had a root proc on it. So it proc a root effect, which wasn't that great for rangers because we like to snare and run around. But it was the first magical item that I ever got, and someone actually gave it to me, and I'd been playing the game. It's been a long time ago, probably 5-6 months by that point, as opposed to modern variations of looter shooters, for example, where you're literally like a game like Borderlands, right? You're literally getting a new piece of loot every 5 minutes. And then even looking at the modern version of an MMORPG, even with World of Warcraft Classic, um, all of the quests give you magical items. It's very rare that you're only getting mundane things from quests. You're typically getting something that's got plus might, plus strength, plus whatever, and
Mhm.
etc. So, we can talk about the pros and cons to that. I'm definitely more in the camp of scarcity is good. It makes you appreciate those items when you get them. You'll hang on to them for quite a long time if the game is designed that way, as opposed to the newer systems where they've designed them in such a way to provide that dopamine hit to players. Because designers have realized that instant gratification leads to players wanting to log into the game and play more frequently. This goes back to the daily quests thing you and I discussed before. If you're
Mhm.
providing players with that, well, I'm going to get something every 5-10 minutes, then that's a reason for players to keep playing, as opposed to the old way of doing things where there was this sense of, well, we've created this virtual world and there's a whole lot of lore and a huge place to explore. Maybe that's your reason for playing. So I'll let you speak your thoughts and we'll go from there.
Yeah, you really see this trend of but you don't find any more game that are have scarcity in loot. And I'm really looking forward to have one game like this, because when you see a game like Diablo 3, I think it's a good example. It's not an MMORPG, but this is the typical game where loot is raining, like almost literally. I guess Path of Exile is the same kind of things. This is the type of the game. You're just getting loot, 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 loot. You place it in your inventory as you can. Then you go back to the vendor, you trash it, or you dismantle it, or whatever, you refine it, whatever you're doing. What has value is only the very rare legendary items that will have some specific combination of stuff that you want, that you are looking for, and that you will be happy for. Everything else is meant to be trash. And so I'm wondering, why are we doing this? For me, the effect it does to me, it's not at all a boost of dopamine. I just don't care. I'm just like, okay, my bag is full, which annoys me more than missing the loot. So I'm like, oh, screw that. And I'm annoyed by the amount of stuff that fill up my bag so fast. I don't like that. I don't find it pleasurable for me personally. And I have the same problem in every game. My inventory is always full, and I don't like this. And so I prefer when you have an item that is rare, when you're happy to find it because you have been without item for weeks of gameplay, and then suddenly you have this, whoa, oh, I think it make more sense to me at least.
I just recently played Jedi Fallen Order, which is a PlayStation game. Well, it came out on all these consoles. I played it on PS4. It's a single player game. It's not an MMORPG, but I want to point something out because in that game, there is no armor or weapon progression. There is simply character progression. So you start off the game in a basic poncho and clothes, and you have a lightsaber. And your lightsaber can be customized visually, as can your character. You can change the colors and types, kind of color, clothing, everything else. And you can change lots of different the ways that your lightsaber looks. But the one thing that all of the media has reported on is that there is never an improvement to the damage of the lightsaber that you start the game off with. The lightsaber that you start the game with is the lightsaber that you finish the game with. The only thing that changes is the colors and customizations. So here's a game, and through perks, through character perks, there is a final perk kind of way up in the chain that's meant to be taken as you get towards the end of the game, where you can actually increase the damage of your lightsaber. But it's one of those end game perks that you're only going to get to after you've put 25, 30 hours of gameplay into the thing, and you're getting close to the end. It's not something where your lightsaber is going to be progressively getting better every 5 levels or every time you complete a quest. It's just, here's a weapon, do with it what you can, and play the game. And I thought for me, it was a very gratifying experience because I didn't have to worry about gear. So instead of focusing on gear, I was actually able to immerse myself in the storyline and just go play the game and have fun and not be focused on,
Hmm.
well, this one has excuse me, this has +2 strength, but it has, a couple points minus dexterity, so I'll be losing some armor class, but I'll gain some strength. Those kind of things always boggle my mind. Even when I'm playing World of Warcraft Classic, there is an overabundance of loot to the point where I really only pay attention if it's a blue item or better, because it's rare that a green item, excuse me, is going to provide me with an upgrade, mostly because of just the fact that I've crafted my own gear, or I've run dungeons with the guild primarily. I have done questing, but the primary fountain of my gear, so to speak, is from dungeon runs and crafting my own gear. So I'm actually in basically a full set of blue. I think I only have a couple of pieces of green, and I even have a couple of pieces of purple at level 47. But it's like every time we do a dungeon run, within the first 30 minutes of that run, maybe 30 items, magical items, have already dropped and been rolled on by the group. And because everyone's complaining within 30, 45 minutes of, oh, my bags are already full. And it's like, at what point did we get there? Like, where did we make the transition from the EverQuest one or Dungeons and Dragons style, where loot was really rare and scarce in terms of rare loot, magical items? Where did we go from that to where we are today? Because even World of Warcraft is not the best example when you compare it to the looter shooters, or like you say, the Diablo games, which are all about loot. I mean, the whole system of Diablo is around these infinite permutations of gear and just basically running through and just trying to get that perfect mutation that fits your specific play style. Um, I can't really put my finger on when that transition happened. I want to say it was around the time Warcraft or EverQuest 2 came into play, but I never played there was transition games between EverQuest 1 and EverQuest 2 and the launch of World of Warcraft. You know, there's Asheron's Call and Star Wars Galaxies and these other games.
I don't really know why it has turned that way. Um, because I don't even think I know that I am personally not someone that is very incentivized by loot. I'm not motivated like this. It's the same thing in real life. The carrots for me will not be the rewards. It will be something else. I'm attracted more to self-improvement and stuff like that. But this is personal. And I know that for a lot of people, the reward is very important. To have better equipment, it's part of their fun. They enjoy to do theory crafting about the best gear. They like it, they love it. But I do not think that the overabundance is amusing anyone. To find the perfect combination of gear and receive something when you're doing a job or a dungeon or PvP or whatever, you will be happy to. If you're someone like this, but to have it loot here and there, and that most of the time is trash for everyone.
Can
It's not
you
even good for someone. So why?
Sure. Can you think of I have some specifics in my mind, but I'd like to hear your opinion. Are there any specific items in any games that you've played that you can think back on and go, that took me a really long time to get, and I used it for a really long time, and so I remember it. Like it's this item that it took me 6 months to earn it, and then I used it for the next 6 months, and that's one of those items I can put in my like top five most famous items of an MMORPG. Do you have any of those types of
Not
items?
equipment, but mount and pet, yes.
So pets.
Pet and mount, yeah,
Okay.
but equipment I have not. Um,
Because I can.
yeah, I think yes, I remember, but that's because I was very new to the game. It was in World of Warcraft Classic when I first played, and then you could at level when you reach level 60 or maybe even a little bit before, you could have your first piece of gear that were related to your class. So I was a priest, so it was devote gear. And I remember that someone has offered me bracer in a role play ceremony, and I was like, "Oh my god, I have the first piece of my debut set!" But it's probably the only time where I really got very excited about something like this. Um, Everything else was more, yeah, I was happy because of the look or something like this. But
I can think.
eh,
There were items in EverQuest One. For example, I mentioned this in the previous. It took me months to get the that first bow that you can craft, the True Color bow, True Shot, excuse me, and then you get Rain Caller after that. But it was this quest that required you to first get your fletching really high, and then you had to get these rare items, some of which were found in a remote, island in the middle of nowhere. And it was something that took me months to get that bow, and then once I got it, I then used it for like a year until I was able to get the upgrade to that, which was Raincaller, which in and of itself was another epic level quest. And then thinking of the two Ranger swords, can't even remember the name of them now. Raincaller was one, I think. Or no, I don't. No, that's the name of the bow. I can't remember the name of the two swords, but you had two swords. That took me 2 years. It took me 2 years to get my Ranger epic swords, and I used those for at least 2 years before I
but
replaced them with gear in subsequent expansions. And then thinking about like EverQuest 2, the only thing that stuck out in my mind at EverQuest 2 was even though I did all of the raid content for the first few expansions, it wasn't until the Runes of Kunark expansion when they brought the mythical weapons into play that I felt like this was actually something that was truly challenging because even the previous stuff, like in the first expansion, they had these weapons called the prismatic weapons, which required you to first you had to do this epic quest chain to learn how to speak the dragon language, which was you had to go to all the high end dungeons and gather these dragon runes, and that was something that took several weeks. In the case, some people took them several months, just depending on how often they could run dungeons, and then you had to do another series of subsequent chains, and then you got to the point where you had to kill this dragon boss, and you got this cool weapon. But the thing was, that weapon was not that cool because as soon as the expansion came out, it was replaced with the next series of the Peacock Weapon Quest, is what they were called, which is another series of epic weapon quests. Um, But and then they did like another series in the next expansion. But when they did the mythicals, once you got the mythical weapons, those weapons actually lasted for several expansions after that. And it was also, instead of being a series of only a few weeks to a couple months of quests, uh, rating at mythical level was when EverQuest 2 was really hitting its stride by Runes of Kunark, and the raids were 24-man raids, and you had to have a really tight crew together, and these mythical weapon quests had stuff that was solo, stuff that was duo, stuff that was small group, stuff that was a full group in a dungeon, and then stuff that was like two groups together, and then full raids that was, four groups together. And it was this scenario where it took 6 months basically for our guild to get everyone their mythical weapons. And when you think about something that's taking 6 months of time, most people these days don't even play an MMORPG for 6 months at a time. Most of them will play an MMORPG for 2 3 months, and then they go off to the next game because they're cycling through the expansion content. So it's like, oh, Final Fantasy has a new expansion. We're over here for 3 months. Oh, ESO has a new expansion. We're over here for three. Oh, Guild Wars 2. I'm over here for 3 months. As opposed to the way players used to play games, which was I'm going to spend 6 to 8 months doing this whole expansion pack. And then when we got those mythical weapons, it wasn't just that it took us 6 months to get them. It's like now we're going to be using them for the next year and a half to 2 years. And that's something that I haven't seen in any games since EverQuest 2. Now, granted, I haven't played World of Warcraft Live. I understand they had some like attuned weapons or something where you could like change the stats in them or something with like sockets. I don't really understand how the epic weapons work in World of Warcraft Live.
Well, it depends. There are several games that offer you very difficult and challenging weapon to get or equipment in general. Final Fantasy do have the similar of what you described. We never play EverQuest, but
Sure.
a long series of quests that you need to do. It take lots of time to have a very nice weapon, which is very specific look. I don't know how the weapon is powerful related to the different patches of a different expansion, because you always have a tier or gear during a patch during an expansion. So an expansion is lasting 2 years and a patch will last 4 months, something like this. So every patch, your gear will get up into eye level or whatever you call it. But those weapons, they are very good for the whole expansion, I think, when you manage to get them. And they have a very specific and particular look. So even if you miss an expansion, you can still go back just, to have the look of this weapon. That's for Final Fantasy. Elder Scrolls Online do have in general, in Elder Scrolls Online, you do not really have these things which is best in slot, because you have so much combination of things that you can create for your build, for your character, and you do not have a vertical progression, at the contrary of Final Fantasy and World of Warcraft. So you have more and more and more choice of different style of gear, and there's never anything that's really beating everything else. You can find something that will suit your need best. So it's sort of best in slot, but it's not truly a best in slot. However, you do have an arena, which is a solo arena, which is extremely challenging, which do provide very often the best weapon that you can imagine, because they have some specific power, and for certain builds they are very good. But they can be very difficult to get, because the whole arena system, you have to pass through 9 different arena that are gradually more and more difficult. You need to do it without dying, and you need to do it under a certain time. And if you succeed all of that, then you have a chance on the last boss to have one weapon. And on that weapon, you can have different traits. And so very often, I remember one guy, which is a Elder Scrolls Online streamer, that did more than 300 run
Oof.
to finally got the Inferno staff precise that he wanted. More than 300 run, and that was something.
There was something, yeah, somebody was talking about something similar in World of Warcraft Classic where he was a shadow priest. It was one of our guild members who's no longer playing, but he was talking about there was this special crafted item that tailors could craft that was really good for his. It was like best in slot for shadow priests. But in order for a tailor to craft that item, there was like 8 or 10 different combinations that could come out of the crafter combining and making that item. So it was a random chance that you were going to get the stats that you wanted for your shadow priest. So you had to be prepared to have enough materials to give that tailor a continual stream of materials until you got the one you wanted. You might get lucky and get it within the first 3 or 4 combines, or you might get unlucky and it takes 20 to 30 combines for you to get the one that has the exact stat combination for you.
Hmm.
And I looked at that and I'm doing the math and I'm like, you're really only getting like a 1%, maybe 2% better whatever by having this. And I'm like, I'm honestly not going to waste my time over something that's only going to give me 1 or 2% difference. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
That's not game breaking. But there are people that are like that who want to have the absolute
Yeah.
best. Like they can't, it bothers them. It's like an itch in the back of their brain that it's like, I need to have the best item or I will die.
And this is really something that I find interesting because loot is all about bettering yourself for doing certain type of content. And in my mind, I have always compared two type of player. You have the player that want to gear up so they can do the content because the content, to be able to do the content is the reward, and to have the victory over that content is the reward, while you have other players that do the content so they can have the equipment. But then I'm always wondering, but why do you want the equipment? Why is that your final reward? That's because I do not understand that motivation, I guess.
The loot motivation.
um,
I think for me, it's icing on the cake. But I play MMORPGs to do things with other people, like to be social. I like to, just like I like D&D because it's a social activity. Um, if I'm gonna play a single player game, that's why I have the PlayStation 4. And even that has group-based games. But actually, I honestly rarely play group-based games on the PS4 for the specific reason that it's mostly lobby games, so you're
hmm.
not actually forming relationships with people. You're just getting into a group finder, a matchmaker system, and you're being grouped up with people from all around the world to run a 4-man dungeon. And then in 15 minutes, you're never going to see those people ever again. As opposed to an MMORPG, where I need to be in a guild to complete the group-based content, and that's what motivates me to play an MMORPG, is so that I can go forth and kill the dragons that require me to have a group of 20, 30, 40 people around me. Um, so yeah, it's never been the loot, but I will say this, loot is always, it's like the bonus. It's like it is a nice icing on the cake after you've killed the dragon to be able to, pull this amazing fiery sword out of its treasure hoard and be like, "Yes, I am now the owner of this awesome fiery sword of doom, and now I have this sword that no one else has." But that's the flip side also in the way that games operate today, is that even the most epic of weapons have become relatively easy to obtain, in the sense that it's no longer, yes, I have this weapon that no one else has. It's, yes, I have this weapon that only 2,733 other people also have. Um, as
Or
opposed,
worse, it is
uh,
the sort I must have, otherwise I'm not a competent player and I will be kicked out of the
kicked out of the
groups.
group because I don't have the right best in slot items. That shit drives me nuts. We had a big debate about this actually. The people are no longer in the guild because they moved on. But when we were first forming our World of Warcraft Classic Guild, there were some people who were not part of our long-term, like they were part of our Saga of the Simi community, but they had never played with us in
Mhm.
other games. They were just kind of peripheral. They hadn't pre-ordered our game. They were just in our Discord channel, and they wanted to join us because we talked about being a progressive guild and all this other stuff. So when they found out that I was rolling a warrior, a dwarven warrior, to be the main tank for the guild, there was 3 or 4 people, I don't remember exactly how many now, who made it their mission over the course of like 2 weeks to continually talk about how humans were the only race that a main tank warrior should consider for raiding, because of the higher pari ratio that they have, which help generate threat and rage, as opposed to a dwarf who gets stone skin, which is really cool, defensive buff. Um, and these people honestly believed and argued and debated to the point that they left because they considered us to be a failed raid guild before we even got to the raid content because I was rolling a dwarven warrior as opposed to a human warrior. And the only thing I have to say to those kind of people is this, because there is nothing. I had a top 10 worldwide guild for 7 years. Not once did we ever pay attention to best in slot or got to have this specific combination. It was just, who do we have available tonight? And in some cases, all right, we've got enough tanks. Unfortunately, we don't need another berserker, so you're going to have to sit out tonight, Brad, Matt, whatever your name is, but you're always going to take whoever's online at that time as long as they're playing. You have to have a somewhat balanced structure, but it's not like we have to have 4 shadow priests and we have to have 3 wardens and 2 hunters and blah 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 blah. It was just, all right, who's online? Okay, we need 4 tanks. Great, we got 4 tanks. We need 4 healers. Great, we got 4 healers. Okay, now we need some leather healers. Boom, we got the 4 leather healers. Okay, now we need some mages. Got the 4 mages. Got the 4 warlocks. You just, whoever's online. And something that we did Maraudin the other night, I think is the name of the dungeon, and we were looking for one more person to join us because we didn't have 5 people. We only had 4. And I had a guy who sent me a tell, and he said, this is what he said. He says, well, if you're looking for DPS, I could come, but I'm spec'd as Moonkin, and I don't know if that's something that you're comfortable with. And it was like the way he said it was like he'd been told that because he was a Moonkin druid, he wasn't good enough as a DPS player. And it's like,
Yeah.
dude, you're a warm body. Come join our group. Like, it doesn't bother me that someone is not the perfect spec or the perfect class. It's like you'll see people debating in OOC. That's not OOC. It's World Chat, debating like whether or not this spec of a warrior. Like, I've had people flat out tell me like that I need to spec my character with these specific 30 abilities, and if I don't take those abilities, I'm going to be a shitty tank. And I'm like, I literally just went into the protection tree and have taken 100% protection stuff the way I want, and I have not had any problems tanking at all. Our groups always have fun. I don't lose aggro. We don't die. We have fun. We successfully complete the dungeons, and we have progressively worked our way up through the dungeons. So it's that best in slot thing. Sorry, that was a trigger thing for me. Sorry,
Yeah.
I went off on that best
I,
in slot.
I understand because I can understand that some people want it, but to be frank, and this is something I say to everyone asking me this question, and I will going to tell you guys, the best in slots may it be with your spec, with your character while following the meta, only work if you're a perfect player. If you will do your rotation perfectly, if you will not slow down, you have, like mechanical, like a robot, and you do it perfectly, then the 1% or the 0.5% stuff that you have on your gear will be of real value. But if you are misstepping, if you do spacebar when you should have press 1, then this 1% will serve nothing because you have done a mistake anyway. I know personally, I'm clumsy. I do a lot of mistake. I do my best, but I'm not this flawless player. Therefore, the gear small percentage, and I'm speaking about a small percentage. I'm not speaking when you really have shitty equipment when you get better, but when you're lacking perfecting everything, so you can have this like little detail saying it only work if you play perfectly, if you are flawless and you make no mistake and you are in a good group, because otherwise it's other people in your group that will make you have to move that way. And so, oh no, my rotation is broken now. It's not perfect anymore. So it will only beneficiate really high game players like Methods that are fighting for the world first in World of Warcraft. Otherwise, the Lambda player, even good ones, do not need to be that good. So it's very, very wrong to impose it on the face of people because it will not beneficiate anyone, I think, in general. And so it can really be nasty and toxic and shatter the confidence of someone to be really pointless. So
My
I think that's very
my
important.
brother specifically, one of the reasons he never got to enjoy World of Warcraft class live, despite trying to play retail a few times over the years, is because he would come into these servers as a new player, and he didn't have the best in slot gears. He just had whatever he was getting from solo quests. And every time he would join the matchmaker, he said that he was basically getting kicked out of like 90% of the groups that he would get invited to because he wasn't doing enough DPS on the meter
Hmm.
that people are running, and so they would all vote to just kick him out because he wasn't as good as what they had in mind. And it's unfortunate because he never got to experience the game the way he wanted to, and he eventually quit playing because of that level of toxicity of players who are only focused on, well, if you don't have best in slot, then you're not going to be in my group. So loot is one of those things where it's a double-edged sword. It can be necessary for high-end raid content, and by this I mean, when I say necessary, I'm thinking resist gear. Like in the early days of most games, I think even World of Warcraft, at least what people have told me, we're obviously not raiding yet, but I've been told that you're going to need nature resist, and you're going to need fire resist, and you're going to need these resists to be able to do these raids. It was the same way in EverQuest 1, where you had to have at least, I remember the requirement was 1,000 armor class and 100 in every given resist. So 100 versus fire, 100 different versus ice. I can't speak properly. You had to have 100 in each one of your resists and 1,000 armor class to be considered if you were wanting to join any of the guilds that were raiding the dragons. And the reason for that was because if you had less than 100 resists, you would not be able to resist the AoE breath effects, and you would die. And if you die, you're wiping the whole raid. So there was requirements in place that you had to have specific gear to be able to handle the raid content. But that's a fraction of the overall content of any given game. It's like
And this
10% at most.
this doesn't exist anymore.
Not
I've
really,
never
from
seen.
from what
I've
I've
never
heard.
seen a game. World of Warcraft Classic were doing it, but after that, I've never seen it in any game. Maybe I'm not aware of everything because obviously I've not been raiding in Rift, for instance. I could not say what's happening in raiding in Rift, but yeah, I don't think the resistance gear is something. But in a way, I find that interesting because for the gear hunter, it can be something nice to hunt. In the same times, that's what we need to always think. Loot is great, but then you also have um, those requirements that you need to be able to do certain type of content. And if you make it too complex to gather the equipment needed to be able to do a certain type of content, that will exclude a lot of players from that content. So in certain way, I rather prefer the approach where you can gather some equipment to ease your way through it, but you don't need it. And people, the content itself is relatively accessible to people to try it, because I think that's what you want. A lot of people playing the games and experimenting things, and then you can tune in more difficulty. But I don't really like when there's such a barrier that will require too much time to be able to get into that to obtain this. I like when you have very long and painful quests that are for cosmetic item. So just for fluff. Oh, look at this. Or just like, I have this super sword. It's not a better sword than anything else, but it's so much more fancy and look cool. I'm fine with that because then people have the choice to do it just to brag about that. Bragging rights, cool. But I prefer when the content is welcoming and allow a lot of players to experience it and to try it.
Okay. I'm on the opposite side of that spectrum, which I think we kind of know because we had this discussion previously about gated content.
Yeah.
I'm definitely more in favor of. I'm happy with there being 10% of the game that is unaccessible to just everybody. Like it's there for the people who want to go the extra distance. It's not mandatory per se, but it's there for the people who want to be able to go do it and to set themselves apart from the rest and have the bragging rights of saying, I have the sword that only 10 other people on the server have. Um, I've been there, and it feels great. It's also not about the gear itself, but the fact that I accomplished that with a team of extremely competent, extremely talented people who were putting in 10 to 12 hours a night for the last 6 months, and really putting in the time and effort to get to this point. The flip side of that is if the game developers decide to invalidate that with an expansion that comes out in 6 months and says, "Oh, the the very basic green gear that you're going to get from quests in this next expansion now invalidates that cool purple gear that you spent eight
Yeah,
months working for." And it's
I
like,
agree.
ah!
And that is general what's happening in games, except horizontal game in terms of progression. The content is released too fast for you to really
That's why
have to put so much time. It's not worth it to put so much effort and time into something you will obtain that will only last
That's
few
why
months
one of the
anyway.
things I really appreciated about early EverQuest was, when I finally got those bows and when I finally got the swords, it was those things where now I'm going to use these for the next 18 months to 2 years of game sessions. So I was justified in taking so long to get them and working for them. And now I have them. They were also so hard. The Epic 1.0s in EverQuest 1 were so hard that it really was, if there was 500, that's an exaggeration. There wasn't 500 Rangers on a given server. If there was 100 Rangers on a given server, maybe only 15 of them, 10 to 15, would actually obtain the epic swords because it was such a difficult journey to get there, and it required full raid forces raiding in the plains, and you had to have all that resist gear I was talking about earlier to be able to even to get there. So it was this thing where when you got there, it was a sense of accomplishment because you'd done it with so many people, but also because I'm like one of only a handful of people. So when people see these two weapons, they know that I went through hell and high water to get these, and not everyone has them. As opposed to today, you know, especially with items that you can purchase in a cosmetic shop. Richard and I have had a lot of good discussions about that because as much as he hates cash shops, he's also addicted to them with Elder Scrolls Online, and like has to have, as a fire mage, he like has to have the fire mount, and this fiery staff, and like all these things that make him look like a billowing figure of flame, and it's all stuff that he could just go to the store and purchase, as opposed to an EverQuest you would have to go out and actually earn that gear and bust your butt for it, and it could take you a year or more to get all that gear, as
Yeah,
opposed to now where you could just purchase it for $5 in a cash
it's
shop.
true, but this is really it's a discussion that includes so many different aspects.
Have we done a cosmetic
Um,
discussion yet?
Not yet. I think
It's
this
in
could
the
be.
notes.
But what I wanted to say, we see clearly a trend here with this, the trend of overabundance of items, which are also something that you have for very short time content. So content that are um, valid for a very short amount of time. And when I say a very short, I mean it can be several months. And I know that players get very bored when World of Warcraft is not getting with a new raid after 6 months. But I think
They
that
start stressing.
everything is so fast paced, and I like games that allow you to take your time, that give you the time to get into something, where you can take the time to discover the game, learn it, explore it, embrace it, and own it. And when what you're doing into the game is not completely obsolete 3 months after because you have been too slow. And this is something I dislike in vertical progression games, to the contrary of horizontal progression game, which, well, you do not have this feeling of progression. This is really true, and I know I can understand that it make can feel hollow for certain type of players, but in the same time it allows you to tackle the game at your own pace, and to never be too late, and to never be too early. It just, you can access everything when you want, and I
Okay.
like that kind of freedom. Um,
In terms of
yeah,
immersion, I want to segue into the next talking point for this episode. In terms of, immersing yourself and exploring and enjoying and taking your time. Something that was brought up during the last episode that we briefly touched on that we wanted to cover in an episode was environmental art in games and how the way mini games of today are designed, excuse me, as you said, to be consumed at such a fast pace. Um, it's almost like no one's really taking the time to enjoy what's been created by environmental artists and designers. It's a case where I think the easiest scenario is to look at the instances for a game like Elder Scrolls Online would be a good example. But even World of Warcraft, Star Wars: The Old Republic is another good example. These are games where they have these dungeons that if you've never done it before and it's your very first time and you're doing it on level, then it might take you an hour, hour and a half. But if you're somebody who's, if you're a little over leveled or you don't care about, the story per se, and you're just space barring through or hitting the escape button to get past all the dialogue, and you're just trying to get to the end so you can get the best piece of loot and move on with your daily quests, it's something where you can run in like 15 minutes. And it blows my mind when we talk about people who don't take the time to immerse themselves or even take the time at all to enjoy a game, because these case in the case of instances, you know there are hundreds, dozens if not hundreds of man hours. um, Let me rephrase that: hundreds of man or woman hours, so that people aren't thinking that we're being sexist on this show. Just hundreds of hours in particular of hard work for whoever's working on that. So you've got the environmental artists, you've got the set artists, set designers, you've got the asset creators who are creating the assets. There's so many different people, and then you've got, lighting and shading, and you've got music and sound effects. There's all of these, literally dozens of things that come together to making an area feel natural. And yet you'll see players like, well, speed run, let's go, and they just want to go through it as quickly as they can. And it's like, I'll admit that even when I've played ESO, the few times I've played, like I'll take the time to pause and do screenshots. And if I'm in a group with people, like by the time I've paused, taken 3 or 4 screenshots, and turned around, they're gone. Like completely, like I'm looking on the mini map going, where the hell did everybody go? And they're like 3 corridors off to the right, because there is no waiting for someone to take the time to smell the roses and appreciate the art of a world. It is, we are here to get to an objective. And then the same thing happened to me when I've tried to play Final Fantasy 14, where I'd get into a group and you've got those cutscenes that are at the beginning of every instance. And so I'd be watching the cutscene, and then I come out of the cutscene and the group's dead somewhere up ahead, and I'm getting yelled at because, where were you? Why weren't you doing DPS? What's your problem, man? And I'm like reading the dialogue and watching these cutscenes. Like, why didn't you bother asking or waiting or any of these things? It's a very frustrating point to me as a player to find that people don't want to take the time to enjoy something like the environmental art, because there's a lot of hard work that goes into this. But also from a designer standpoint, I feel like it's like no one's actually taking the time to appreciate the amount of hard work that goes into this. And this comes back around full circle to our conversation about loot, because they're so focused on the loot and on getting that next new item that the quest is going to give them, that's going to be an upgrade for the thing they got 20 minutes ago, that they're not actually paying attention to the cool statues or the carvings on the wall or everything else. As opposed to, like, I'm running through World of Warcraft Classic right now, taking screenshots of everything. Like, my favorite so far is still Oldemon, with like the Indiana Jones city, where you go put the staff in it and like the beam of light comes out, hits the door opens, boss mob comes out, and I'm like, that's like really cool stuff. But the only reason I was able to experience that and everything else was because my group actually was like, dude, this is your first time. You take the staff, you get the amulet, you go put it in the city and watch what happens. And I'm like, oh, this is so cool. As opposed to a pickup group where they're just like, somebody's just grabbing it and they don't even wait for you to get to the room. They just stick it in, and it's like they're fighting the boss while you're still 2 tunnels back, you know, picking
Yeah,
mining something
and
or something.
this is something I've noticed. There's a lot of people that are looking for that kind of group. So if you're in this case where you're in someone that want to take your time, do not hesitate to ask people, because there's more people than we think that want the same thing, that want slow-paced group, or that are totally willing to accompany people that want to take their time, and they will be happy to share their love for the games, to give tips or say something. There's a lot of lore fanatics. There's a lot of people that enjoy art a lot more than we think. It's just that I think a lot of people do not dare to ask, and so you have this normal behavior or normal etiquette of behavior that you have in dungeon, which is go fast, follow the tank, blah blah blah, blah, etc. But you can, if you reach out, if you ask people, then you can have your own group with your own taste.
It's true, which is why I do most of my stuff with a guild group, because we go at our own pace. I don't have to worry about some idiot running off and chain pulling everything when they shouldn't be the one pulling. I don't have to worry about people who don't want to take the time to read things or to watch the dialogue. Um, from a design standpoint, knowing how many hundreds of hours go into creating even the simplest of things, um, such as a series of wall murals that are in a dungeon or a series of statues that are placed throughout a dungeon. I've seen how much hard work our team has put into making things, and it really does. I think there's something to be said for developers designing games that are meant to be consumed at a slower pace. This is one of the reasons we decided that we weren't going to include a mini map in our game from the very beginning, was because we said that, not having a mini map. So to take a step back from that a minute, if I was creating a science fiction game, something that's set in a futuristic time where everyone has a PDA or some sort of device, and I've got a watch, and I can click a button and a hollow map pops up, and I can see where I'm at, and it's like Google Maps but more advanced because it's science fiction version of Google Maps. That makes sense in a science fiction environment. But we're talking a medieval environment. Even though it is fantastical and there is magic, it still is medieval at its core, and that means pre-technology. And GPS is a technological advancement. It's not, it's not something that is it's not meant to be in a medieval environment. So when we started looking at that, there was a variety of realism reasons we didn't want to include a mini map, but there's also this sense of something that we remember from our time playing EverQuest 1, is that even coming back 15 years later, I know how to get, as a starting player, I know how to get from where I spawn in the world as a wood elf up to the bank in the city of Kelethan, despite, not having played that game for 15 years, because I played it so much back in the day, and we played it without maps and GPS. So rather than paying attention to a waypoint, I was paying attention to the world and the actual landmarks and the zones and the forest and the music and all of these different things. Like everyone, whenever you talk to an old school EverQuest 1 player, they all talk about the music from Greater Fate Arc and Kelethan. Like that's music that has stuck with them over the years, despite the fact that many of them haven't played in 15 years, but they can still remember that music because it was something where they actually were so immersed in the game that they were paying attention to that even on a subconscious level, as opposed to nowadays where I can't tell you the theme song for most games. It's like, especially zone music. I mean, one thing I've appreciated in World of Warcraft Classic is they've got the thematic music. So like the Stormwind theme or the um, why am I blanking on the Night Elf city?
Darnassus.
Darnassus theme. Like there's these themes that'll show up when you go into there'll be like a dwarven hub somewhere, and it's like, oh, this is the Ironforge music, and there's a human hub in another zone. It's like, oh, this is the Stormwind music. These are things because you're immersed in the game to a greater level. Whereas with the mini map, you're just kind of on auto follow, and you're going everywhere. So thinking about landscapes, there's something that people often talk about from EverQuest, and I don't know if you have these experiences in Warcraft, so I'll shut up here in a second. Um, when the Velius expansion came out, there was this amazing giant bridge of ice that went across these two islands. It went across this area in, I think it's called the Eastern Wastes, from Ice Clad Ocean, Eastern Wastes, something like that. And it had like these dragon head, you know, it's basically a giant dragon head, and then this ice bridge, and there's lots of ice giants running around. And the view when you're running across the zone, you see this massive giant dragon skeleton on the horizon, and the closer you get, like, oh, it's actually the opening of a bridge. And you know, it's something that stuck with you as a visual. Like if you were ever lost, you just had to look around, and somewhere in the distance you would see that dragon head and be like, okay, that's where the bridge is. I know where I'm at. As opposed to most games where it's just um, like even World of Warcraft Classic, even though the mini map is much reduced from live, there is a on the compass there is a waypoint that points you in the direction of the nearest city or outpost. So you're never truly lost. Even if you have like Shadow of War on the map, you know, or Fog of War,
Mm.
excuse me, you still know where the nearest waypoint or the nearest city is or outpost or somewhere safe because it's right there on your compass. It's like, no, it's that way, it's that way, it's that way. Can you think of any? Are there any landmarks or things that jump out at you that you can remember from games
Oh
that are
yeah,
part of
no,
the
no. I
environment?
I am someone that pay a lot of attention to the environment in games. So every game I play, they have specificities and beautiful things that are standing out in some way, or just atmosphere. And I like pay a lot of attention to the atmosphere of games. Elder Scrolls Online is really good with that. They have really nice atmosphere. The sound is really good. If you remove the music, you just listen to the atmospheric sound. It's really, really good. And they do those very beautiful place, and you could play without the maps, I guess. World of Warcraft is the same. Now I will say that you have a game that are playing differently, and those games need to be played differently. Like ESO is a relatively slow paced game if you really play it the way it's kind of intended, which is a lot of exploration and story and lore and quest. So it's kind of slow. And I have some friends that say, ESO is too slow for me. I like to do those fast quests. I want to kill mobs fast, and they enjoy to do that. And they can enjoy also an environment, not so much because they take the time to observe everything, but because they're of repetition. They are going to spend the next 2 years in those places doing quests, daily quests every day with 5 different characters. Though they're getting there, they will not stop, but they will see it because they are bathing into these places, and they will have their preference. Oh, I like this because of that. And maybe the reason why they prefer a zone will not be so much because, oh, I really like the color of the tree in that zone, but maybe it's because the layout is very more convenient. I can walk faster
It's
in it
easier to do a speed
and
run.
and do my quest more easily, but they will still appreciate in a certain way. It's different, but they will still have an experience of the land and the landscape, but not in the contemplative way, but more in the practical way.
So I was telling you this story before the show, and I'll bring it up here because I think it's a good case study for players who don't pay attention to the environment. So something that happened during Shadow of the Avatar's development was they implemented, you know, they always had this compass, but eventually they implemented waypoints on the compass that would direct you towards quest objectives. And when there was this one area where there was this quest objective that was basically on the other side of this cliff, and the cliff was designed in such a way that you didn't really know it was there unless you were paying attention to the environment. And the moment that they added those waypoints in the game, they noticed that suddenly there was this stack of hundreds of corpses that started to build up, that just kind of just appeared out of nowhere and then began to build up after they implemented waypoints. And basically what was happening when they looked at the data was players weren't paying attention to the environment. They were paying attention to the waypoint on their compass, and they wouldn't see the cliff, and the ground would just fall up underneath them, and their character would fall to its death and leave the corpse, you know, there at the bottom of the mountain. And I think that's the perfect example of kind of what I'm driving at here, which is the type of player or the type of mentality that happens when you have that mini map or a GPS system in a game is that there's, whether it's willingly or not, there's a portion of your mind that switches off and doesn't pay attention to the environment anymore. You're only paying attention to the waypoint. And by the way, this also applies to the real world. So I come from the pre-internet generation, although only slightly. We had internet in my home from the time I was around, I want to say 12-ish, 11, 12. Um, but when I say, pre-smartphone even, like I didn't get a smartphone until 2014. No, 2015 was when I finally got a smartphone. But when I still had my company, when I had my construction company in the late 90s into the mid 2000s, there was no Google Maps. It was literally someone would give you directions to a place and they would tell you, okay, so you need to drive down this street for 2 miles and then look for this landmark. And the street right there is named Lamar Street. Go right on Lamar Street, go for 3 blocks or 3.2 miles, turn left when you see the red mailbox, and drive another 1.7 miles. And then you'll see a big sign and go right at the sign. Look for the blue house that has the scarecrow out front. Everybody would give you these handwritten directions, and you had to literally follow these directions as you were driving. And to get across the country, you had a map and you had an atlas, and you had to know how to read the atlas or a city street map to know how to get around and how to get to a certain place. Now, I grew up in that environment, so I can appreciate how awesome Google Maps is, because now you can literally turn the camera on your phone on, point it at like a building, and Google Maps will tell you, "Oh, you're on the corner of here and here. You're trying to get here, so walk here, go right there, go left there." This tells you exactly how to get to a place, and for the most part Google Maps is very accurate and it's getting better every year. But if you look at the generation previous to mine, or after mine, excuse me, so I can look at like my nieces and nephews, basically. They have they have no idea what a map is. They have no idea how to read a map, and they can't function without the map. The only way they know how to get from one place to another is using a device that shows them. So they're literally not paying attention to the surroundings. They're paying attention to the GPS, which is telling them, go straight for 100 meters, turn right here, go straight for 500 feet, turn left here, look for the intersection, turn right here. Like they're following a device, they're following a GPS that is leading them where to go. And so I look at the in-game way that people interact, and I also see this happening. People make jokes about the zombie people who just they're always on their phone like this because they're not even paying attention to what's going on around. And I don't know how much of that, we can't put that blame on game development, but I think we can definitely say that that sort of mentality or the way people act in the real world definitely impacts how they play games to a certain degree, because they're not paying attention to things, and you're not paying attention to landmarks, nor do you know to pay attention to landmarks. I've said this maybe in an episode in the past. My wife, Chris, she does not drive. She's never driven. She doesn't have a driver's license. She's my age. I'm not going to say her age on screen because she'll get mad at me, but she's my age. Let's just put it at that. And she's never driven. So anytime we go anywhere, whether it's walking, driving, on a train, whatever, her GPS is shit. Like she does not have an internal GPS. This has nothing to do with being a woman, by the way. My sister's great. My sister's fine with it, as an example. But just because my sister has driven, she grew up driving, and my wife never has. So Chris has never had to pay attention to landmarks, because when you're driving, there are landmarks, regardless of whether you're following a GPS or not. Especially in the pre-GPS days, you were paying attention to, okay, I'm going right here, left here. There's that tower, there's the pizza place, there's the courthouse. Like all of these things, you're remembering these from your directions, and so you know how to get around, and so you pay attention to these things. So when you're coming back, very often you'll be able to get back without having any issues. And Chris is always asking me, especially when we're in foreign cities traveling, like we'll go somewhere on a walk, and then I'll take us back like without any GPS or anything. And she's like, "How are you not lost?" And it's like, "Cuz I was paying attention like when we came here. Like they're just we went left at that tower. Look, we're at that tower." And then just constantly looking over my shoulder and just getting a visual representation of, okay, we took a left at that pizza joint and there was a cat statue on the corner. So when we're coming back, I'm looking for the cat statue. I knew that I came left when I was on the way here, so I'll go right on the way home. These are just things that you learn from interacting with the world in that way. And if you've only ever interacted with the world via GPS, then that's the only way you know how to interact with the world, which I think is also one of the reasons why so many of the modern generation of gamers freak out when you talk about not having a mini map in your game because they can't fathom like having to pay attention to a landmark.
You can consider this as a blessing because you will be able to learn via the video game how to serve yourself, to help yourself, and learn to find your way with landmarks and observation. And then maybe one day it will serve you in real life when your battery's off and
Your
your
battery's
phone
dead,
is not
or
on.
the
Yeah.
alien robot invasion happens and we don't have self service anymore. When the Terminators take over. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of food for thought packed into this episode between the rarity of loot. So on the one hand, what do you think about loot systems, everyone listening? Do you prefer the fast-paced, like shooter mentality where you're getting a new piece of loot every 15 minutes? Or do you prefer the more slow-paced thing system where you're getting a piece of loot maybe every few weeks or even every few months? And then in regards to environment art, are you someone who actually takes the time to appreciate environment art? Do you actually use, like, are you overly dependent on the minimap, or are you someone who, given the opportunity, you'll turn it off? Like in more modern games are giving you the option these days, like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Red Dead Redemption 2. These were games that gave you the option to turn the minimap completely off and the compass off and pay attention. That was actually one of the cool things about Assassin's Creed Odyssey was they would give you verbal directions on how to get to a place. And so if you had everything turned off like I did, um, it was actually like you were exploring the Greek mythological world, because you had, oh, I'm going to the Mount of where, and it's south of the seaport, and I have to go southeast across and find the island. So then you're on a boat going southeast, and you're looking for islands on the horizon and trying to see the ones that have like a statue and a volcano. So, are you that type of player, or do you like GPS? Thoughts, etc. Um,
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add to that, Ella?
And I think it's interesting to see, oh, what type of player are you? Are you the
Yeah,
type of player that's, need to have action and adrenaline and something that's fast paced? Or are you more the chill, relaxed kind of player? Or maybe do you have both in you and sometimes you prefer that and sometimes you prefer something else? There's a game that propose you different type of activity. I'm thinking about Elder Scroll Online, for instance, that you can play in a very slow pace or in a very fast pace if you want, but then you have the treasure map. And the treasure map, if you're not
they
cheating
take
by
you
checking on
everywhere.
Wiki, you can really put your observing skills and you will see if you have been someone observant, you find a treasure map, you say, oh, yeah, I remember this.
I remember
I
that
remember
tree
this
or that
view.
waterfall or that view because
Yeah,
they only give you a
exactly.
small portion. It's like a little kind of hand-drawn sketch, and it's like,
Yeah, and
have I been
it's
there?
already the interpretation of something, so it doesn't exactly look like it is.
It's a lot
So
of fun, that treasure system, yeah. So thanks for your comments, etc., everyone. Happy holidays, because this will be the last episode of the year. So we will see you all in 2020. So have a safe and happy holidays with friends and family. Don't freeze
last
to
episode
death.
of the decade.
Yes. Ooh,
So
of the decade. I hadn't thought about it
yeah,
that way.
what have you been doing this last decade?
Getting
What are you
older.
grateful for? And what is your plan for the next decades? I wish you a lot of success and happiness.
See you, everyone. Talk to you in
Bye.
the new year.